Property tax cuts look great on campaign signs. School bus cancellations generally do not make the sign. That is why Oklahoma voters, especially seniors understandably worried about being taxed out of homes they have owned for decades, should pay attention to what is happening right now in Indiana. Indiana did not eliminate property taxes. It substantially reduced them. Yet on August 7th, Tri-Creek School Corporation in Lowell, Indiana, announced that beginning August 1st, 2027, it will eliminate all school-sponsored sports and extracurricular clubs for kindergarten through 8th grade. 1 year later, on August 1st, 2028, it plans to eliminate all school bus transportation. More than 2,200 children currently ride those buses every day. The district is also considering reductions to high school athletics, instructional support staff, and student safety programs. Tri-Creek says it is trying to close a roughly $3 million budget deficit following changes created by Indiana's 2025 property tax law. That does not mean Indiana's tax cut caused every financial problem Tri-Creek has. The district was already struggling. Voters rejected an operating referendum in 2023, and the district subsequently eliminated more than 30 positions and reduced spending. That history matters, and pretending otherwise would make the Indiana example weaker rather than stronger. But the latest problem is equally real. Tri-Creek says the additional revenue loss under Indiana's new property tax system created a hole it can no longer absorb without eliminating services. Indiana taxpayers received tax relief. The cost did not disappear. It showed up somewhere else. Indiana's experience is not just one school district complaining about its budget. When lawmakers debated the legislation in 2025, the state's nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency estimated that public school districts would receive about $744 million less in property tax revenue from 2026 through 2028 than they would have received under previous law. The largest annual reduction was projected for 2028. Supporters argued that homeowners needed relief, and they had a legitimate point. Property valuations and tax bills had increased rapidly in many areas. But reducing a homeowner's tax bill does not reduce the cost of operating a school bus. It does not reduce the price of diesel fuel. It does not eliminate the salary of the driver. It does not make coaches, counselors, police officers, firefighters, or librarians free. Government can eliminate a tax. It cannot eliminate the services that tax was paying for unless it is also willing to eliminate the services themselves. That is the part that rarely fits on the campaign sign. Indiana is not alone. Iowa enacted another major property tax law in May 2026. Among other changes, it limits annual growth in property tax revenue for cities and counties to approximately 2%. Des Moines is now beginning its fiscal year 2028 budget process months earlier than normal because city officials project an approximately $12 million budget deficit, followed by another roughly $5 million gap in fiscal year 2029. The city says the new state property tax law is a major reason it must find ways to reduce costs and services, and the choices being discussed make the trade-off unusually clear. Among the options, not yet final decisions, are closing 2 public swimming pools, reducing library hours or closing a branch, reducing park maintenance, adjusting firefighter staffing, reducing neighborhood police services and patrol staffing, and imposing additional fees. Again, homeowners may receive property tax relief, but somebody still pays for the police officer. Somebody still pays for the firefighter. Somebody still pays to keep the library open. The political debate is not really about whether we pay. It is about who pays, how we pay, and what happens when we don't. Texas offers another useful comparison because it did not simply tell school districts to absorb the entire loss. Texas has substantially increased its school property tax homestead exemption. The mandatory exemption is now $140,000 for a resident's homestead. But Texas lawmakers also recognized something important. Reducing local school property tax collections does not magically reduce the amount needed to operate the schools. The official fiscal analysis of the 2025 increase from $100,000 to $140,000 specifically provided additional state aid to largely offset school district revenue losses. The Legislative Budget Board estimated the increased exemption would shift substantial costs to the state, about $1.24 billion in fiscal year 2026 and $1.38 billion in fiscal year 2027, before other offsetting changes in the school finance system were counted. Texas found a way to lower one tax bill. But Texas did not repeal arithmetic. It moved much of the cost from local property tax collections to the state budget. That may be a policy voters support, but it is not a free lunch. Republican gubernatorial candidate Mike Mazzei is proposing to eliminate homestead property taxes for seniors 65 and older and veterans. His campaign says the plan can be accomplished without raising income taxes, without shifting the burden to working families, and without disrupting schools or local services. Mazzei's concern is legitimate. A senior living on Social Security or a fixed pension should not be forced out of a home simply because surrounding property values have soared. The disagreement should not be over whether those homeowners deserve protection. They do. The question is whether eliminating the tax based primarily on age is the most effective way to provide that protection, and whether the promised replacement revenue is actually there. Mazzei's own plan says county governments would first be expected to become more efficient and reduce spending. It then assumes economic growth will help replace revenue. The plan estimates senior property taxes represent about 10% of collections and says any remaining gap would be assessed after budget reductions. Then comes perhaps the most important sentence in the proposal. Local voters would decide whether they want to replace the lost tax collections. Mazzei's timetable says that in year 2, voters would decide on the senior exemptions and any replacement mechanisms. That deserves more explanation before the election. What are those replacement mechanisms? Another local tax? A sales tax? Higher fees? State appropriations? Reductions in services? And what happens if economic growth does not produce enough additional revenue to cover the exemption? Those are not arguments against property tax relief. They are the questions taxpayers ought to ask before being promised that something costing hundreds of millions of dollars can simply disappear. There is a more targeted approach. Oklahoma Senate Democratic leader Julia Kurt has argued that instead of eliminating property taxes based simply on age, Oklahoma should strengthen programs already designed to protect seniors and struggling homeowners. Kurt has suggested expanding Oklahoma's existing senior valuation freeze, reconsidering outdated income and age requirements, and improving the state's little-used property tax credit for low-income households. That credit is a good example of what has gone wrong. A household currently must have gross income of no more than $12,000 to qualify, and the maximum credit is only $200. Oklahoma has allowed inflation to make what was supposed to be a meaningful protection almost irrelevant. Senator Dave Rader has already proposed a practical starting point. Senate Bill 45 would have increased the income limit to $38,000 and the maximum credit to $2,000. The Oklahoma Tax Commission estimated that approximately 3,254 additional taxpayers could become eligible at an annual state cost of roughly $6.5 million. The bill never received a recorded vote. That is the kind of relief Oklahoma ought to be debating. Increase the limits, index them to inflation, strengthen the senior valuation freeze, protect disabled homeowners, focus the largest benefits on people for whom increasing property taxes actually threaten their ability to stay in their homes. I wrote about that approach earlier in Oklahoma Does Not Need a Property Tax Windfall. It needs targeted relief at langdon.substack.com. There is nothing fiscally conservative about collecting more tax than government needs. But there is also nothing fiscally conservative about cutting a revenue source first and figuring out who pays for the services later. Indiana cut property taxes, and one school district is now preparing to eliminate school buses. Iowa limited property tax growth, and Des Moines is discussing library, police, fire, and recreation reductions. Texas reduced school property taxes but committed state dollars to replace much of the lost local revenue. 3 different approaches. The same arithmetic. You can cut the tax. You cannot repeal the cost. Oklahoma should absolutely protect seniors and struggling homeowners from being priced out of their homes. But before candidates promise to eliminate a tax, voters should ask a second question. What disappears with it, or who gets the bill instead? because the campaign sign may say, cut property taxes. Probably will not say, find your own ride to school. Follow the money at langdon.substack.com.